Commandant Vex stood at the edge of the black stone balcony and watched the red sun rise over the mountains. The volcanic peaks of Sethrak Prime glowed like burning teeth against the orange sky. Below him, the War Academy spread across the cliffs like a dark stain. Training fields, combat arenas, and punishment chambers all carved into the ancient rock by slaves who died 1,000 years ago. He had run this place for nearly 200 cycles. In that time, he had seen warriors from 12 different star systems walk through his gates. Most of them crawled out, broken, if they came out at all. The survival rate was 31%. Vex considered this number his greatest achievement. The Korvathi were a reptilian species, cold-blooded and patient. Vex himself stood over 8 feet tall, his scales the color of dried blood, his eyes yellow and unblinking. 3 long scars ran down his face from a training accident in his youth. He never had them healed. Scars were lessons, and lessons should never be forgotten. His senior instructor, a female named Kira Sul, approached from behind. Her footsteps were silent on the stone, but Vex heard the soft click of her claws. "The transport from the Galactic Coalition will arrive within the hour," she said. Her voice was flat, professional. Vex did not turn around. "And it carries the human." "Yes, Commandant. 1 human male. The Coalition has mandated his admission." Vex let out a long, slow breath through his nostrils. The air smelled of sulfur and smoke. "I have read the files on this species. Soft bodies. No natural weapons. No armor. No venom. No telepathy. They cannot even see in the dark. They are new to the galactic stage," Kira Sul said. "Perhaps the Coalition wishes to test them." "The Coalition wishes to insult me." Vex finally turned. His yellow eyes met hers. "They send me a fragile creature from a primitive world and expect me to waste my time training it. This human will not last 1 day." Kira Sul said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing with the Commandant was pointless. Together, they walked down the winding stone stairs to the main courtyard. Other instructors had already gathered there, standing in a perfect line. All of them were Korvathi. All of them scarred. All of them veterans of wars that had burned across the galaxy. They watched the sky with cold patience. The Coalition shuttle appeared as a silver dot against the red clouds. It grew larger as it descended, its engines humming with a low, steady sound. Dust swirled across the courtyard as the ship touched down. The rear hatch opened with a hiss of pressurized air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single figure stepped out. The human was small. That was the first thing Vex noticed. The creature barely reached 6 feet, with pale skin that looked soft enough to cut with a claw. He had short brown hair and light brown eyes that squinted against the sulfuric air. He wore a simple gray uniform, with no markings except a small patch on the shoulder that read, "Hartwell." The human looked around at the volcanic landscape, at the jagged black rocks, at the smoking vents in the distance. He looked at the line of 8-foot reptilian warriors staring at him with cold, unblinking eyes. And then he smiled. "Danny Hartwell," the human said, his voice calm and easy. "Reporting for training." He adjusted the pack on his shoulder like he was arriving at a summer camp rather than the deadliest military academy in the galaxy. Vex felt his neck spines flatten against his skull. This was a response his species had when confused. He had expected fear. He had expected trembling, crying, perhaps even begging. Every other species reacted that way when they first saw the academy. But this human was smiling. Kira Sul stepped forward. "You are Danny Hartwell of Earth?" "Yes, ma'am." The human gave a small nod. "Former rescue swimmer, United States Coast Guard. Served 4 years. Ready to learn." Vex moved closer, his heavy footsteps echoing across the courtyard. He towered over the human, blocking out the red sunlight. His shadow fell across Danny like a dark blanket. "Do you know where you are, human?" Vex asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Danny looked up at him without stepping back. The Korvath War Academy. Toughest training program in the known galaxy. 31% survival rate. You memorized the statistics. I did my homework. Vex Theris leaned down until his scarred face was only inches from Danny's. His breath was hot and smelled of iron. Knowing the numbers means nothing. This academy has broken species far stronger than yours. The Vialori, with their healing blood. The Kreth, with their armored shells. The Mindari, with their psychic powers. All of them have failed here. All of them have begged for mercy on this very ground. Danny held his gaze. His heart was beating faster now. Vex Theris could see the pulse in his neck, but the human did not look away. With respect, Commandant, Danny said slowly, I didn't come here to beg. Silence filled the courtyard. The instructors exchanged glances. No one had ever spoken to Vex Theris like that. Not in 200 cycles. Kirasul's claws twitched, ready to strike the human down for his disrespect. But Vex Theris raised one hand, stopping her. He studied the human for a long moment. Those light brown eyes showed no arrogance, no stupidity. There was something else there. Something Vex Theris could not name. We shall see, the Commandant said finally. He straightened to his full height. Take him to the holding cells. The first trial begins in 1 hour. Danny was led away by 2 guards. He walked between them calmly. His back straight. His steps steady. He did not look back. Kirasul moved to stand beside Vex Theris. He is either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both, Vex Theris replied. He watched the human disappear into the dark stone corridors. It does not matter. By tomorrow, he will be like all the others. Broken and begging. But even as he said the words, Vex Theris felt a strange unease in his chest. Something about the human's eyes stayed with him. That calm, steady look. That small smile. He pushed the feeling away and turned to prepare the first trial. He had broken thousands of warriors. One fragile human would be no different, or so he believed. The holding cell was small and cold. The walls were made of the same black stone as the rest of the academy, and the only light came from a dim red crystal in the ceiling. Danny sat on the hard floor with his back against the wall, breathing slowly and counting the seconds. He had known this would be hard. The files he had read back on Earth made that clear. But reading about something and living it were 2 different things. The air here burned his lungs. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's, making his body feel tired and slow, and the look in the Commandant's eyes had been pure, cold hatred. Danny closed his eyes and thought about home. He thought about the ocean, the smell of salt water, the sound of waves crashing against the shore. He thought about his grandmother's voice, soft and warm, singing him to sleep when he was a child. He thought about the night everything changed, the storm, the screaming wind, the cold black water pulling him under again and again. The door opened with a grinding sound. 2 Korvathi guards stood in the entrance. The Commandant is ready for you, one of them said. Danny stood and followed them through the winding corridors. The academy was a maze of dark hallways and steep stairs. Strange sounds echoed from distant rooms, screams and crashes and low growling that made Danny's skin crawl. He kept his face calm and his breathing steady. They brought him to a large circular room. The walls were covered with strange symbols and old weapons from species Danny did not recognize. In the center of the room stood a metal chamber about the size of a closet, covered with tubes and wires. Vex Theris waited beside it, his arms folded across his broad chest. This is the Crucible of Silence, the Commandant said. His yellow eyes reflected the dim light. You will enter this chamber. Once sealed inside, a nerve agent will flood your body. Every pain receptor in your system will fire at once. It will feel like your skin is being torn from your bones while you burn from the inside out. Danny looked at the chamber. His heart beat faster, but he kept his voice steady. How long do I have to stay inside? As long as you can endure. Most species break within 20 minutes. The Academy record is 53 minutes. Held by a Kreth warrior, who later died in combat. Kirasul stood nearby, holding a data pad that would track Danny's vital signs. Other instructors watched from the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Any questions?" Vex Theris asked. Danny shook his head. "Then enter." The chamber door opened with a hiss. Danny stepped inside. The space was barely big enough to stand in. The walls were cold, metal, and there was no light at all. As the door sealed behind him, Danny was plunged into complete darkness. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence and the sound of his own breathing. Then the pain began. It started as a tingling in his fingers and toes. Then it spread, racing through his body like fire. Within seconds, Danny felt like every inch of his skin was being stabbed with 1,000 hot needles. His muscles cramped, his bones ached. The pain was everywhere, filling every part of him, leaving no room for thought. He screamed. He couldn't help it. The sound tore out of his throat and echoed off the metal walls. In the observation room, Vex Theris watched the monitors. Danny's heart rate had doubled. His stress hormones were flooding his system. The nerve agent was working perfectly. 3 minutes, Kirasul announced. "He is already screaming. He will break soon." Vex Theris nodded. "They always do." But then something strange happened. The screaming stopped. On the monitor, Danny's heart rate was still high, his pain levels still maximum. But he was no longer making any sound. Vex Theris leaned closer to the audio feed. At first, he heard nothing. Then, very faintly, he heard humming. Danny was humming. It was a slow, simple tune. A melody from Earth, though Vex Theris did not know it. The human's voice was shaking, broken by gasps of pain. But he kept humming, the same notes, over and over, like a prayer. "What is he doing?" Kirasul asked. Her voice was confused. Vex Theris did not answer. He watched the monitors in silence. Inside the chamber, Danny's eyes were squeezed shut. Tears ran down his face. The pain was worse than anything he had ever felt. It was worse than the cold ocean water filling his lungs. It was worse than watching his teammates sink beneath the waves. But he had survived those things. He had survived them because of his grandmother's lullaby, the song she sang when he had nightmares as a child, the song he sang to himself when the world became too dark and too cold. He held onto the melody like a rope in a storm. 30 minutes passed, then 45, then an hour. The instructors began to whisper among themselves. This was impossible. The human should have been broken long ago. His vital signs showed extreme agony, yet he was still conscious, still humming that strange little song. At the 90-minute mark, Danny's humming stopped. For a moment, Vex Theris thought he had finally passed out. Then the audio feed picked up a new sound. Danny was speaking, whispering numbers. 10,000, 9,000, 999, 9,998. He was counting backwards. "His mind is adapting," Kirasul said. Her voice was quiet, almost frightened. "He is using the counting to distract himself from the pain." Vex Theris said nothing. His claws dug into the arms of his chair. At the 2-hour mark, some of the instructors left the room. They could not watch anymore. The human's endurance was unsettling in a way they could not explain. At 2 hours and 30 minutes, Kirasul turned to Vex Theris. "Commandant, his heart is showing signs of strain. If we leave him much longer, he may die." Vex Theris stared at the monitors. The human was still counting, still whispering numbers through cracked, bleeding lips. "End the trial," he said finally. 3 hours is enough." The chamber opened. Danny collapsed forward onto the stone floor. His body was shaking, covered in sweat. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. But he was conscious. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. He looked up at Vex Theris, with those light brown eyes. "That the best you got?" he whispered. Then he collapsed completely, unconscious before he hit the ground. The room was silent. The instructors stared at the fallen human like he was some kind of monster. Kirasul checked her data pad. 3 hours and 12 minutes. A new academy record by nearly 2 hours. Vex Theris stood motionless for a long time. His neck spines were flat against his skull again. That strange unease had returned, stronger than before. "Take him to the medical wing," he ordered quietly. As the guards carried Danny away, Vex Theris remained in the observation room, staring at the empty chamber. For the first time in 200 cycles, he did not understand what he was dealing with. The medical wing was quiet. Danny lay on a hard bed, covered with a thin blanket that did little to stop his shivering. Strange machines surrounded him, beeping and humming, monitoring his healing body. A Korvathi medic had injected him with something that dulled the pain, but the memory of it still echoed through his nerves like distant thunder. He slept for nearly 4 hours. When he woke, he was alone. Danny stared at the stone ceiling and thought about the crucible. 3 hours. He had spent 3 hours in that darkness, feeling like his body was being torn apart, cell by cell. And he had survived. He didn't feel proud. He felt empty. The door opened and Kira Sewell entered. She stood at the foot of his bed, studying him with those cold reptilian eyes. "You are awake," she said. Danny sat up slowly. His muscles ached, but the worst of the pain was gone. "Yeah. How long was I out?" 4 hours. The Commandant has ordered a rest period before the second trial." "There's a second trial?" Kira Sewell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you think one test would be enough to prove yourself?" "The crucible was only the beginning. There are 7 trials in total. Most cadets do not survive past the third." Danny nodded. He had expected as much. Kira Sewell continued to stare at him. There was something different in her expression now. Not hatred, not disgust. Something closer to curiosity. "The tune you were humming in the chamber," she said. "What was it?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "A lullaby. My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was a kid. When I had nightmares." "And you used it to endure the pain?" "I used it to remember that pain ends. That everything ends eventually. You just have to hold on long enough." Kira Sewell tilted her head. Among her species, this was a sign of deep thought. "The Korvathi do not have such songs. Our young are taught to suppress fear and pain, not to manage them. We are trained to feel nothing. Nothing at all? Nothing that could be used against us." Danny looked at her for a long moment. "That sounds lonely." Kira Sewell did not respond. She turned and left the room, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Meanwhile, in his private study, Vex Theris was reading. The Commandant's study was filled with weapons and trophies from 100 conquered worlds. But tonight, he ignored them all. Instead, he sat hunched over a holographic display, scrolling through the Galactic Coalition's database on human biology and psychology. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans, the files explained, had evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them. Their planet was filled with predators, poisonous plants, extreme weather, deadly diseases, and natural disasters. By all logic, such a fragile species should have gone extinct long ago. But they didn't. Instead, they adapted. Humans developed something called persistence hunting. They would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies could regulate heat better than almost any other species. They could survive injuries that would kill most creatures, continuing to function even with broken bones, blood loss, and organ damage. But their physical traits were not what made them dangerous. It was their minds. Human psychology was unlike anything Vex Theris had ever studied. They had developed complex systems for managing trauma. They could compartmentalize pain, setting it aside in their minds and continuing to function. They formed deep emotional bonds that gave them strength in moments of crisis, and they had concepts like spite and stubbornness that seemed to defy all rational behavior. One passage caught Vex Theris's attention. When pushed to the point of breaking, many humans do not surrender. Instead, they experience what researchers call defiance response. They refuse to break, simply to prove that they cannot be broken. This behavior appears irrational, but has been observed consistently across human history, from ancient wars to modern survival situations. Vex Theris sat back in his chair. His claws tapped slowly against the armrest. He pulled up Danny Hartwell's personal file. The human had been a rescue swimmer for something called the United States Coast Guard. His job was to jump out of aircraft into stormy oceans to save drowning people. 4 years ago, Danny's unit had been caught in a severe storm. Their helicopter went down. 3 crew members drowned immediately. Danny, despite being injured, had grabbed 2 unconscious teammates and swam through freezing water for 14 hours. By the time rescue arrived, one of them had died. The other survived. Danny had received multiple awards for heroism. He had also spent months in treatment for something humans called post-traumatic stress disorder. The nightmares still haunted him. According to the file, Danny had volunteered for the Corvath War Academy specifically. When asked why, his response had been simple: "I need to know I can survive anything." Vex Tharis closed the file and stared at the darkness outside his window. The door opened and Kirasul entered. She bowed her head respectfully. "You wish to see me, Commandant?" Vexi Tharis did not turn around. "I have been reading about humans. As have I. Their biology is strange. Their minds are stranger." Vex Tharis finally turned to face her. That boy in the medical wing did not endure the crucible through physical strength. He endured it through memory, through emotion, through love for a grandmother who sang him songs. Kirasul was silent. "We have spent 200 cycles training warriors to feel nothing," Vex Tharis continued. "We believed that emotions were weakness, that the strongest soldiers were those who had been emptied of everything except duty. That is the Corvathi way. Yes. And yet a fragile human with a head full of nightmares just broke our academy record." Vex Tharis moved to the window. He did not suppress his pain. He carried it. He used his memories and his feelings like tools, like weapons. Kirasul considered this. "You believe we have been wrong? I believe we have been incomplete." Vex Tharis turned to her, and for the first time in decades, there was uncertainty in his yellow eyes. "Begin the second trial in 2 hours. I want to see what else this human is capable of." Kirasul nodded and left. Alone again, Vex Tharis looked down at the holographic display still showing Danny's file. The human's face stared back at him. Young and ordinary and completely unremarkable. But behind those eyes was something the Commandant had never encountered in 200 cycles of training warriors. He did not yet have a word for it, but he was beginning to fear it. Danny was not ready for the second trial. His body still ached from the crucible. His hands still trembled when he tried to hold them steady. But when the guards came to his room, he stood up without complaint and followed them into the dark corridors. This time, they brought him to a different chamber. It was larger than the first, with a high domed ceiling covered in glowing crystals. In the center of the room sat a strange chair connected to hundreds of thin wires that hung from the ceiling like spiderwebs. Vex Tharis stood waiting, as before. But this time, there was something different in his posture. He seemed tense, uncertain. "This is the gauntlet of wills," the Commandant said. "The first trial tested your body. This one will test your mind." Danny looked at the chair. "What does it do?" "It reaches into your memories. It finds your deepest fears, your greatest failures, your darkest moments. Then it makes you live through them again, while you must complete a simulated combat scenario." Kirasul stepped forward. Most cadets choose to face tactical fears. Enemy ambushes, ship failures, overwhelming forces. The mind selects what it believes will break you fastest. Danny nodded slowly. He already knew what the machine would show him. He had been dreading it since he first heard about this trial. "How long do I have to last?" he asked. "Until you complete the scenario," Vex Tharis replied. "Or until you break." Danny walked to the chair and sat down. The wires descended automatically, attaching to his temples and the back of his neck. They were cold against his skin. "Begin," Vex Tharis ordered. The world dissolved. Danny opened his eyes and found himself standing on a beach. The sky was dark, filled with black clouds that blocked out the stars. Rain pounded down so hard he could barely see. The wind screamed in his ears like a living thing. And there, in the shallow water, 2 bodies floated face down. Danny's heart stopped. He knew these bodies. He knew the shape of their shoulders, the color of their hair. He had trained with them for years. He had laughed with them, eaten with them, trusted them with his life. Lucas Bennett and Chris Olsen, his teammates, his friends, the ones he couldn't save. Danny fell to his knees in the water. The cold shock hit him like a punch to the chest. This wasn't real. He knew it wasn't real. But every part of his mind screamed that it was. The smell of salt and rain, the weight of his soaked clothes, the sound of the waves crashing in the darkness. No, he whispered. No, no, no. In the observation room, Vexith Theris watched the holographic display. It showed Danny's simulation in perfect detail. The human was on his knees in the water. His face twisted in agony. His cortisol levels are critical, Kirasul reported. His heart rate is dangerously high. The emotional trauma response is overwhelming his system. What is he seeing? One of the other instructors asked. Personal memory, Kirasul answered. A drowning incident. He lost 2 close companions. The instructors shifted uncomfortably. The gauntlet usually showed tactical scenarios. Showing personal trauma was rare. It only happened when the machine detected that the subject's greatest weakness was emotional rather than strategic. On the display, Danny was still kneeling in the water, tears mixing with rain on his face. End the simulation, Kirasul said. He is breaking. If we push further, we risk permanent psychological damage. Vex Theris held up one clawed hand. No. We watch. Commandant. This is beyond the normal parameters of the trial. The human's mind may not recover. I said we watch. Vex Theris's voice was hard, but his eyes never left the display. Danny knelt in the water for 12 agonizing minutes. His whole body shook with sobs. The rain continued to fall, and the bodies of his friends continued to float just a few feet away. But slowly, something changed. Danny's breathing steadied. His hands, which had been clawing at the sand, went still. He lifted his head and looked at the bodies in the water. Then he stood up. One step at a time, he waded into the surf. He reached Lucas first, turning the body over and pulling it toward shore. The weight was heavy, the water fighting him with every step. But Danny didn't stop. He dragged Lucas onto the dry sand, then went back for Chris. It took him nearly 20 minutes to get both bodies out of the water. By the end, he was exhausted, barely able to stand, but he arranged them carefully, side by side, their arms crossed over their chests. Then he knelt beside them and spoke. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracked and broken. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I think about it every day. Every single day. I dream about this moment, and I wake up screaming. He paused, wiping his face with the back of his hand. But you would tell me to keep going. You would tell me that giving up is worse than dying, so I'm going to finish this. For you. He stood and turned toward the darkness beyond the beach. Somewhere out there, the simulated combat scenario was waiting. But before he moved, Danny looked directly at the sky. He seemed to be staring at something invisible. Something beyond the simulation. You think this breaks me? He said. His voice was quiet, but in the observation room, every word was clear. I've lived this every night for 3 years. You're not showing me anything I haven't already survived. Then he picked up the weapon that had materialized beside him and walked into the storm. The combat scenario was designed to be overwhelming. 12 enemy fighters, limited ammunition, minimal cover. Cadets with tactical training sometimes completed it. Cadets in emotional distress never did. Danny completed it in 9 minutes. 0 casualties in his simulated unit. Record time. When the simulation ended, Danny was sitting in the chair, his eyes open, his face calm. The wires detached and rose back toward the ceiling. Vex Theris approached him slowly. The human looked up at the towering commandant without fear. What happens now? Danny asked. Vex Theris did not answer immediately. He studied the human's face, searching for cracks, for weakness, for any sign that the gauntlet had done its work. He found nothing but exhaustion and peace. The second trial is complete, Vex Theris said finally. You will rest until tomorrow. Danny nodded and stood. His legs were unsteady, but he walked out of the chamber on his own, refusing help from the guards. The instructors began talking among themselves in low, worried voices. Kirasul approached Vex Tharis. "That was the fastest completion time in Academy history," she said, "and he did it while reliving the worst moment of his life." Vex Tharis said nothing. "Commandant, what is happening? How is this possible?" Vex Tharis turned to face her. For the first time since she had known him, there was something other than cold confidence in his eyes. It looked almost like awe. "He carried his pain into battle," Vex Tharis said slowly. "He used his grief as fuel. His love for his fallen companions gave him strength instead of weakness." Kirasul's neck spines flattened in confusion. "But we train soldiers to eliminate such emotions. We teach that love and grief are vulnerabilities." "Yes," Vex Tharis replied. "That is what we teach. And in 6 hours, one small human has proven us wrong." He walked out of the observation room, leaving Kirasul alone with her confusion. In the medical wing, Danny Hartwell lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, he did not dream of the storm. He dreamed of his grandmother, singing softly, telling him that everything would be all right. The twin suns of Sethrak Prime sank below the volcanic ridges, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Vex Tharis sat alone in the obsidian courtyard where he had first met Danny Hartwell, watching the darkness creep across the mountains. 6 hours. That was all it had taken. 6 hours to destroy everything he believed about strength and weakness, about training and warfare, about what made a true warrior. The stones beneath him were ancient. Thousands of warriors had stood on this ground before being broken by the Academy. The best of them had become empty vessels, perfect soldiers with no fear and no doubt. The worst had died, screaming in the trials, and now a small, soft, fragile human had walked through those same trials and come out the other side not empty, but full of pain and love and memory, full of things Vex Tharis had spent 2 centuries teaching his cadets to destroy. The Commandant did not move as the first stars appeared in the sky. His mind was working through everything he had witnessed, trying to find the flaw in his logic. Surely the human would fail eventually. Surely there was a breaking point that had simply not been reached yet. But deep inside, Vex Tharis knew the truth. There was no hidden weakness. Danny Hartwell was not strong despite his emotions. He was strong because of them. Footsteps approached from behind. Vex Tharis recognized them without turning. "I expected to find you here," Kirasul said. She came to stand beside him, looking out at the darkening landscape. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I have reviewed the data from both trials," Kirasul finally said. "The results are unprecedented. The human's physical resilience falls within normal parameters for his species. But his psychological endurance is beyond anything we have documented." "It is not endurance," Vex Tharis replied. His voice was quiet, tired. "Endurance implies suffering through pain until it passes. What that human does is different. He absorbs the pain. He makes it part of himself. He uses it." Kirasul considered this. "Among the Korvathi, we are taught that memory is a prison, that holding on to the past weakens the present. That is why we train soldiers to forget their losses, their fears, their loves." "Yes." Vex Tharis finally turned to look at her. "And in doing so, we create soldiers who fight for nothing. They follow orders because they have been emptied of everything else. They are weapons, not warriors. Weapons have served the Empire well for many generations. Weapons can be broken. They can be turned against their masters. They feel no loyalty because they feel nothing at all." Vex Tharis rose and walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, the training fields were empty, waiting for tomorrow's exercises. "That human boy has something our soldiers do not. Purpose. He is not fighting because he was ordered to. He is fighting because he chose to. Because the memory of his lost friends demands that he become stronger." Kirasul was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you intend to do?" Vextharis stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the spiral arm of the galaxy, a small blue planet spun through the void. A world of soft creatures who had no armor, no venom, no claws. A world where the weak should have been destroyed long ago. Instead, they had conquered their planet. They had reached into space, and now one of them had walked into the most brutal training program in the galaxy and refused to break. "I intend to change everything," Vextharis said. He turned and walked back toward the Academy's main building. Kirasul followed, her confusion evident in the stiffness of her movements. "The curriculum," Vextharis continued as he walked. "The training philosophy. The way we evaluate success and failure. All of it must be rebuilt. We do know." "Enerwak, Commandant, you are speaking of reforms that would take years. The High Council will never approve. Then I will make them understand." Vextharis stopped at the entrance to his study. "We have been creating soldiers who feel nothing. From now on, we will create soldiers who feel everything and fight anyway." He looked back at Kirasul, and in the dim light, she saw something she had never seen before in his eyes. "Hope, promote the human to instructor candidate," Vextharis ordered. "He will help us understand this new way of training. He will teach us what his species has learned through thousands of years of survival." "You would give an outsider such authority?" "He earned it." Vextharis opened the door to his study. "In 6 hours, he taught me more than I learned in 200 cycles. That is worth any title I can give him." Kirasul bowed her head. "As you command." She turned to leave, but Vextharis called after her. "Kirasul." That song, "The Human," was humming in the crucible. "Have you found what it was?" She nodded. "A human lullaby. It translates roughly to, 'Everything will be well, for you are loved.'" Vextharis was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have much to learn from a species that teaches its children to fight with love rather than hate." Kirasul left, and Vextharis entered his study alone. He sat at his desk, surrounded by trophies of war and weapons of destruction, and began to write. He wrote through the night. Page after page of new training protocols, new evaluation methods, new philosophies. He wrote about memory as strength rather than weakness. He wrote about purpose as the foundation of true courage. He wrote about the danger of creating empty soldiers and the power of warriors who fought for something greater than themselves. By the time the twin suns rose again, he had completed the first draft of a new academy curriculum. In the medical wing, Danny Hartwell woke to the sound of birds. No, not birds. Some alien creature singing in the volcanic vents. Its voice high and strange and somehow beautiful. He lay in bed for a while, staring at the stone ceiling. His body was sore but healing. His mind was calm in a way it hadn't been for years. The door opened, and Kirasul entered. She stood at the foot of his bed, just as before. But this time, there was something different in her posture. She seemed almost respectful. "Danny Hartwell," she said formally. "By order of Commandant Vextharis, you have been promoted to instructor candidate. You are to report to the main hall at midday to begin your new duties." Danny sat up slowly. "Instructor candidate? After 1 day? Eh? You completed 2 trials in 6 hours, both in record time. The Commandant believes you have earned the right to help shape our training programs." Danny stared at her, processing this information. "He wants me to teach? He wants you to help us understand." Kirasul paused, and something in her expression softened slightly. "Your species is unlike anything we have encountered. The Commandant believes we can learn from you." Danny thought about this for a long moment. He thought about Lucas and Chris, floating in the dark water. He thought about the 14-hour swim that had nearly killed him. He thought about all the nights he had woken up screaming, convinced that he should have died with his friends. "Okay," he said finally, "but I want to make one thing clear." "Yes?" Danny looked directly into her cold reptilian eyes. "I'm not strong because I don't feel pain. I'm strong because I feel it every day, and I choose to keep going anyway. If your soldiers want to learn from me, they have to understand that first. Strength isn't about being empty. It's about being full of things worth fighting for. Kirasul was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she bowed her head in respect. "I will inform the Commandant," she said. "I believe he already understands." She turned and left. Danny stood and walked to the small window in his room. Outside, the volcanic landscape stretched toward the horizon, harsh and alien and beautiful in its own strange way. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he could really teach these cold warriors to feel, to love, to carry their pain instead of burying it. But he knew one thing for certain. He had come here to prove that he could survive anything, and in 6 hours, he had proven something far more important. That survival wasn't about becoming hard. It was about staying soft enough to care, and strong enough to fight for what you love. Danny smiled as the twin suns rose higher, flooding the room with warm red light. For the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow.